what was it? Dan O'Bannon, who wrote Alien, which, that story, it's an amalgam of a lot of different influences, like Star Wars. And someone asked him in an interview, did you steal from anybody? And he said, no, I stole from everybody.
Welcome to your local Cineplex.
Welcome back to your local Cineplex. I'm back with a very talented guest. All of our guests are very talented, but it's each piece I see from a different guest gets me excited. And so our guest today, Scott, man, dude, for people who don't know you and your work, kind of just give us a little bit of where you come from, what planet do you come from?
Florida. A planet called Florida. I guess I've been doing this since around 2015. I actually went to film school years ago. That ship sort of sailed. And then I spent most of my 20s doing a series of go-nowhere temp jobs. And finally, it's like, I'm about to turn 30. I can't be a temp forever. I don't even have a bachelor's degree. So I went back to school at 30 and graduated 3 years later. So 2015, came back out here at the end of 2016. I had actually gotten a job right out of school and quit after 6 months because I was miserable. But then I read about a designer who was doing one movie poster a day for a year as an exercise. And I thought, well, I can do that. So I did. And then by the time I got out here, that opened a couple of doors. I got an internship at BLT, which is one of the big entertainment ad agencies here in LA. And that ended in January 2017. And then finally, I've been freelancing ever since. The summers, things would tend to slow down a bit. Starting from around early 2020, it's almost been nonstop. And I'm lucky in that I got to work straight through the pandemic. So I'm one of the lucky ones there, and I don't take it for granted. But yeah, I've pretty much been at it nonstop now.
That's cool. BLT Communications. That's a great agency. That's actually, of the agencies that we talk about in season 1, BLT was one of my favorites. I really enjoyed the work they did, and I usually had nothing but, if I could recollect right, nothing but positive responses to the posters.
Well, one of the, I learned a lot, worked with some cool people. One disheartening part was when they would give me a book of unused posters for a movie, and I'd leaf through it, and it's like, oh my god, all this stuff is great, and the studio turned it down. And then I'm thinking,
wow.
I remember the Cloverfield Paradox. Is that the one that debuted right after the Super Bowl, I think? We did poster comps for that, and they gave me a book of like 100 that the studio had rejected, and it's like, well, how am I going to top any of these,
Yeah.
And funny enough, back then, I think my very first poster comp took 3 days to do because I didn't know what I was doing. Today, I could pretty much knock out a dozen in a day, depending on the materials and so on. You're freelance now, so I can assume you probably enjoy being a freelancer versus working with an agency. I do. I'm not ready to go back to the 9 to 5 yet. If I have to, or the offer's too good to pass up, I'm not against it. When I was in school, I remember thinking, all of my classmates would ask each other, so are you going to try to go freelance or go work somewhere? And I just remember telling people, I need to work at an agency. I don't know what I'm doing. I need supervision. And then the first job I had out of school was at a small agency, and I realized, maybe this wasn't for me. And I'm enjoying freelancing, and I'll do it for as long as I can. But I do freelance for some of the other agencies, and that's always fun.
I think that's the best of both worlds, to be honest. That's what I want to do, because I was talking to another artist. So anyways, the artist was like, well, there's really two paths. Do you want to go with the agency or freelance? And with the agency, you have these things you got to deal with. You're kind of in a group of a sea of artists pumping out work. Especially like if you're an agency that's selected by like a studio like Marvel, Marvel likes to have like 20 plus comps for their movie, and so you're just kind of like, in a way, he kind of painted it was like a sweatshop type situation of you're just pumping them out. And I was like, I've kind of worked in that environment already. I'm like, yeah, I definitely don't want to go back to that. And so I like freelance to the having that option of becoming the person that you're sought out for. If you're successful in finding your style and you do it very well, then you're sought out for that.
And it's funny you mentioned Marvel, like, and I'm really not the guy you hire to do a Marvel poster. And I remember talking to one art director, and I told him, quirky comedy, A24, something off the beaten path. That's more my style, and he actually appreciated my candor. And but again, when you're working at an agency, you're not only, I don't want to say competing, but it's you and a handful of other designers. Often it's a handful of different teams of designers within the same agency, and then you're competing against different agencies. And when I freelance for an agency, I never assume my poster will be the one, but it's fun and educational, and it's enough just to be doing it and being part of the team anyway.
Yeah, I found that interesting that even if like an agency contracts out to you as a freelancer, and you do a poster for them, I would have at the time I would have assumed that meant your poster was going to be used, but after speaking to someone like Paul Shipper at his level, at him experiencing like he did a poster for Dune, and they wound up not using his beautiful piece and went with whatever the agency provided, which was more photography heavy, composite, floating heads, if you will, type stuff. So I was taken back by that. I'm like, oh, well, that's disappointing.
And I remember a girl at BLT, she said something which was, I assume this has happened to her, where she said, yeah, there are a lot of posters and a lot of rejections and this and that, but after a while, eventually, if you're lucky, you'll get to walk down Sunset Boulevard and see your work on a billboard. And I remember thinking on one hand, yeah, that would be really cool, but on the other hand, no one knows I did it, except me.
Yeah.
So, and then it's gone.
Yeah. Well, that's the plus of social media, because that's what I like to see. Kyle Lambert, he'll do that. He'll go walk Sunset Boulevard and, oh, look, Stranger Things billboard. He'll take a picture and post it. But like, to your point, that's the only way you can show people, hey, that's me. I did that, because I guess that's the plus side of that. What's it like? What are the big differences, I guess, between working amongst, like, in the agency setting amongst other designers versus on your own freelancing?
Well, certainly at an agency, you could turn to the next person and say, hey, what do you think?
Right.
I don't know. I kind of like and again, some agencies when I freelance are more hands-on than others, but the ones I really, and I enjoy working for all of them, but there are a couple where it's basically in the morning, here's the brief, here's a link to the assets, here's a link to the template, have a dozen comps for us by the end of the day, done.
Right.
And I'm off to the races. And then by the end of the day, I've got a PDF with a dozen comps, and that's it. I don't need to necessarily be involved in all the meetings and things like that. Although I do miss kind of having a break room with free stuff in it.
Yeah.
And, not everyone enjoys working alone. And I certainly value being part of a team. When I was back in school, I had to get a job to help pay for school, and I worked at the Container Store of all places. And to go from an environment like that, even though it's retail, where you're surrounded by people, to a design agency where you're just kind of at your desk, tuned out on listening on your headphones, it was a big change. And I realized, oh, maybe I do need the people, and I do need to be part of the team. Ironically, I say that now as someone who works from home. Wish I had a greater point to make with all that, but it just depends. Like, if it's an agency, if it's an environment where I knew I would fit in, I'd be much more comfortable. BLT, it was my first thing. It was an internship. Again, great company and great people. I'd be lying if I said I totally fit in, but you know what? If I went back there now, 5 more years experience under my belt, it would probably be different.
I totally get that isolation thing, because I feel like, well, it's not a thing of feeling, it actually happened. For a good 5 years, I pretty much worked in a vacuum of producing my work. And I really only had my brother, who's an artist himself, and he's a designer himself. And so he would be the only one I could like show my work to go, is this bad? Is this good? What could it be? And he'd give his feedback, and it would always work. But like I said, it was only him. And he also works in isolation too. So it wasn't until recently, starting this podcast, getting to speak with other artists. Now I have a network of colleagues. I can happy to call colleagues and friends now, to where I can send them, hey, that's what I'm in the process right now. I'm sending my portfolio around and be like, what do you think of this? And so they're giving me great feedback and helping me grow and helping me get a better sense of my style, which I'm still trying to develop and figure out what that is. At the same time, racing the clock, to pay the bills and to hopefully get, to make it, whether that means joining the poster posse, which is definitely a goal for me, and working with the multiple galleries. And then what else is helpful, talking with other artists, figuring out which galleries would be more receptive to me as an artist, because some are a bit different and are looking for a different thing. So that's kind of been my journey so far for the couple of years of figuring it out. Because I kind of started off with a fine art background. That's what I knew, but through college, I decided to become a designer because that was the way you prevented yourself from becoming a starving artist. You become a designer, and so I went that direction, got that degree, and was looking for jobs in that field. And even though deep down I knew that wasn't me, it wasn't what I enjoyed, and because of that I suffered the lack of job opportunities. I couldn't produce the work needed at the caliber to impress employers to hire me on, which led me getting with a company that I did not enjoy for 5 years. And best thing happened was getting laid off from that. But which pushed me to go, okay, you know what? I'm going to do what I want to do. I'm going to go poster design, do that. So that's why I'll ask these questions of like, so what's your experience? You did the internship with BLT and what's that like compared to being freelance? And so yeah.
Well, when I went back to school for graphic design, maybe I was always kind of deep down hoping like I'd be able to combine the two interests, film and design, but it was really only in the last semester where I started discovering other designers and sort of the alternative poster scene. And I think that's when Sam Smith and Brandon Schaefer started the Poster Boys podcast. And then I'm looking at their work and it's like, okay, maybe I'm not Drew Struzan. I can't do what he does, or John Alvin, etc.
Right.
But, I could do what these other guys do, and, Midnight Marauder and so on. And it's like, okay, maybe there's a seat for me at this table after all. And I actually did a couple of, in school we had a senior exhibition, and I actually designed a couple of Blu-rays for it, the disc, the booklet, the whole thing. One of them was for David Cronenberg's Crash, which I ended up working on for Arrow a few years later for real.
That's cool.
And I even incorporated a couple of the ideas I had into the final package for Arrow. And it all kind of crystallized around the same time, very fast. And it's like, oh yeah, maybe I can do this. And then the job I had right out of school, a lot of it was work for this local real estate company. And a lot of my time was spent touching up photos, which wasn't bad, actually. I'd kind of just zone out. It was almost like relaxing doing that all day. 6 months in, I was just dreading going to work every day and realized there's got to be something else. And when I discovered the designer, I still don't know how to pronounce the last name, if it's Pete Majoric or Majoric, but he used the handle Craft and Graft on Instagram. And when I saw his stuff, it was like, I'm in. And that opened all the doors. Even at my interview at BLT, he said, it's the daily posters that got me in the door. He's like, yeah, if it had just been your schoolwork, you would not have gotten in.
Yeah, right, yeah.
And I even told the students at my alma mater at Florida Atlantic University a few years later that it'll be subtle. It'll be a gradual thing, but eventually you won't need your student work in your portfolio anymore. You'll have enough professional work where you don't have to show off your student projects anymore, and it's a good feeling.
Yeah, oh yeah. That's a great feeling.
But you don't really think about it until you do it.
Yeah, that's definitely a great achievement to feel. But that's pretty much kind of the same thing with my VHS work, which we kind of spoke about. That really opened up a lot of doors, because that was pretty much me. That was the first initiative for me of pushing. I'm going poster art. And so I just decided to do it in this interesting niche direction. So shockingly, there was a demographic, there was an audience, people who were willing to pay and purchasing it excited. And so it really boomed from there, and it opened up so many other doors and connected to me with so many other things. I'm like, I guess when they do say, when you start producing work you're passionate about, that's when the doors open. Because I've always been told that. I've always saw that, and I just never did it. And then I did it, and then it happened. I'm like, okay, it's true. Yeah, so your work is really great. I like the aesthetic you do. Can you kind of like share that process of like how you got there?
I was actually just telling someone yesterday, I had a potential client phone call yesterday, and she asked me the same thing, and I said, I have to admit, my style, such as it is really just based on my limitations, again, because I'm not an illustrator, so I have to use type or textures or photography or whatever. There's a way to do it well. I'm dealing with a client where they made a poster for one of their previous films, and I'm just looking at it, and it's just a still photo, but it's like just a few little tweaks and it could look beautiful. But instead it's just the photo straight out of the camera, text, done. And it's like a little bit more,
Yeah.
But a lot of people really like the minimalism, and I kind of took that on as a challenge. How do you encapsulate the narrative in one image?
Right.
And I'm about to start work. I'm waiting on some materials. I'm about to start work on a poster for a short film for a returning client. And when I saw the film, my first thought was, maybe we don't even need imagery at all. Maybe it's just, it won't make sense since you haven't seen the film, but maybe the poster can just be like one gradient, red to black, or something like a Rothko painting. And so I'm always trying to simplify, but other times it's, I'll go crazier. I'm doing a booklet for Arrow right now where I'm, manipulating the photos and running them through some Photoshop actions so it looks a little more, not quite as minimalist as I usually do. But yeah, I'm pretty much open to anything within skill set. And when I was doing the alternative posters, sometimes I would just think of an idea. I would just be going for a walk and it's like, boom, got it, just out of thin air. Other times I'm watching a movie and there's a beautiful shot and I just pause it and it's like, okay, that's the poster. But, I try to put in some degree of cleverness, or Capricorn 1, which is about a fake moon landing on Mars, where it's the surface of Mars, and then I added a boom mic shadow, stuff like that. I'm always trying to.
Yeah.
If I can accomplish that, I've reached my goal.
I kind of approach it the same way, and it's funny because you said like I'm no Drew Struzan or I'm no John Alvin, and I'm kind of coming to the point where I kind of have to face that myself. I love illustration. Right, I love it. I like drawing. At the moment, I have to come to the realization that it's not my strongest strength, and that's my limitation, like you spoke of. And so, because of that limitation, and mostly it's all the skills I learned as a designer, I noticed that with the help of another artist pointing out to me that my posters that are more concept heavy, more concept driven, are my stronger ones. And so I had to like sit back and go, you're right. That is something. And so I was realizing, well, maybe my style is that unique of both worlds, of it's concept driven heavy, but marrying in the illustrations. These podcasts won't be released in the order I record them, so it's like, but another artist I was speaking with, I think it was Danny, he was like, we kind of talked about the same thing. Your style is your limitations. That's what that is. And so it's funny you say that. I'm like, yeah, it's true. I mean, he says it, he sees it in his work, you see it in your work, and I'm just now discovering that is true in my work. So, and
in school I really, I discovered the Swiss style and designers like Joseph Mueller-Brockman, where they're just using text over, a solid color with some geometric shapes, and it's like, okay, that counts too. And I often try to go, sometimes it's limited based on the materials I have from the project, but I love to do like a wide shot with a lot of negative space, or sometimes I'll like to zoom in on something to the point of abstraction. And one thing I've kind of learned from looking at Midnight Marauders work is, if you have maybe a screenshot that's not the best quality, grainy or whatever, it's like just lean into it, add more grain.
It's interesting. I hear you say these names, I'm like, it seems like we were exposed to the same type of design aesthetic, and we're attracted to the same stuff. Because I love minimal, I love Swiss design. Man, it's I have an appreciation for it. And as a designer, I really pressed hard into it, but it wasn't my biggest love. And so it's funny, look at my older work, I really pressed hard on that, and then I'm like, well, that's not really me. I appreciate it. It's a great tool to pull from for a specific project, but to sit there and make that my whole identity, you know, as a creative, it just wasn't me.
And I do need to recommend another designer who I don't mention as often as I should, Peter Mendelsohn. He was a book cover designer, but I was listening to an interview with him on another podcast on Design Matters, and he was actually, I think, a trained concert pianist who then transitioned to book cover designer. And I think now he's the art director for The Atlantic or something. And I remember looking at his work and loving it. I have his book. It's called Cover, and the cover is it's just a photo of a book cover. And but the idea that he went from one career to another, you know, like in his I don't know if it was in his late 20s or 30s or whatever, but you know, it's like that's allowed, because you know, when we grow up, it's like you have to know what you want to do. And you know, you can be in elementary school and people are asking, like, you know, what about college? Gotta keep that in mind. And it's okay to start over. And I've done it a couple times myself.
I've definitely had a lot of, I don't want to say soul searching, but more just brand, you know, what am I as a creative, as an illustrator, you know, what is that? And so, I don't know if you experienced this going through design school. It was my experience. And this is something I hope they change with my program. So I went to Texas State University. And so they had a really great design program there. That's the reason why I went. But they really focused heavy on mostly brand design. And at the time, UX and UI were like the big hotshot stuff that was rising. So they quickly developed programs for those too. But so you were not lucky if you did not fall within the brand category, brand logo, UX, UI, web design. If you weren't fit within those 3 or 4 boxes, you were screwed. Because I knew a buddy, talented 3D designer, but because there's no classes, no program to help him, he suffered. And his portfolio suffered. And so I'm hoping, I don't know what he's doing now, but I hope he found it and got the help, because the program did not help him there. Like even then I wanted to do poster design. I took one class. It was more advertising heavy. And so, but yeah, it's in terms of poster design, I didn't get what I needed, and that should have been there. So I don't know if you faced that too.
Well, it's funny. We both went to state schools. I went to FAU, and sometimes I always wonder, like, what did I lose by not going to somewhere like School of Visual Arts or Cal Arts or whatever. But I enjoyed it. But the best thing, by the way, going back to school at 30, my first thought was like, oh God, what if I can't do this? What if I sit in for a lecture and like 10 minutes in, I just can't take it anymore? And having homework again. But one of my, you know, you had to take your prereqs and then you had to pass portfolio review. And ironically, whoever was grading my portfolio said the best part was the written essay, not my drawings, nothing like that. Yeah. But I remember one of my teachers early on took me aside, and of course I just assumed I was in trouble, but she took me aside and asked me, have you done this before? I said no. So once, like after that day, it was like, okay, I'm where I need to be. Yeah. And I had,
Go ahead.
Well, I had lived, you know, and I had no plan for what I would do after graduation. I had lived, before I went back to school, I lived at my aunt and uncle's house in Jersey City, and I'd commute into Manhattan for whatever stupid temp job I had. Some were better than others. But I thought for much of my schooling that I would have just gone back, stayed in Jersey City, and try to get like a job at a firm like Pentagram or something, you know, working with big corporate clients like AT&T or something. Yeah. And obviously that did not happen. But in some parallel universe, I'm working with someone like Michael Beirut at Pentagram, and I've done the new logo for Verizon or something.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And that's funny. That's what was presented to me. That's a success. This is what you want to do. You want to be the next Michael Beirut. You know, you want to go work at Pentagram. You know, and I'm like, part of me was like, yeah, you know, yeah, and the other part of me was like, no, That's so. I mean, I'm sorry, but the punk side of me was like, that's so corporate. I'd rather be doing movie posters. So was that kind of the same experience with you in a state design program?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't say they. Trying to think. I mean, I know there was no emphasis on anything like pop culture, and I think by the end I was the only one. Maybe there was one other student. Like I was the only one who really wanted to do this. Other people that were working on logos and brochures, and I went to school with a lot of talented people. But I mean, as far as I know, I'm the only one who's working in this industry, and I totally forgot about this. The first job interview I had, it was just for some company doing local ads for like car dealerships and stuff. And then when they told me how much it paid, it's like, well, gee, I'll just stay at the Container Store where I don't have any responsibility and I could get paid the same. But not entirely true. But
right.
No, I mean, I used to draw as a kid. I found the drawing classes, since you had to do two, drawing and then figure drawing, those were the hardest classes that I had. And, figure drawing was just something else entirely. It's like, I have to do this. I mean, it's a good skill to have. I'm not great at it. But yeah, I wouldn't say, they didn't really force me in any one direction at all. I know
That's
the
good.
teachers, maybe it's because no one else was doing it, the teachers kind of embraced, the pop culture-y part of things. I even remember bringing in some Blu-ray box set of mine and showing one of the teachers, like, this is the kind of thing I want to do. And I forget what title it was. I just remember the teacher saying, like, hopefully you do a better job than this one or whatever. And that's what I'm doing now. So thankfully it's all worked out. But yeah, they didn't really steer us in any one direction at all, which in retrospect, I mean, I didn't think of it at the time, but I appreciate that now.
At the end of this episode, I like to ask your top 3 movie posters.
Oh, boy. And it's funny because whenever I answer this on Twitter, it's like I always have 4 ready to go. But I will give you one,
Okay.
at least for now. If we do a follow-up episode in the future, maybe I'll have more. But I will say Superman by Bob Peak.
Oh, yep.
The original 78 Superman, blue sky, multicolored streak.
Yes.
Even if you don't know even if you aren't intimately familiar with Superman, you know exactly what the poster represents. It accomplishes what it sets out to do, and it's just a beautiful piece of art.
It is. It really is. It definitely. I look at that type of poster. That's it. For me, it's an example of going. See, that's definitely one of my strengths. I would be happy to produce a poster like that because it's not a highly illustrative, dealing with likeness type of posters that you see a lot of out there. It's more of a concept-heavy, symbolic thing, where it's a beautifully rendered S logo, and then you have Soups flying by, and you're getting to convey his speed. So it's all those things are in that piece.
That one. Also love another Bob Peak, Star Trek the Motion Picture.
Oh, yes.
I love that poster. And I don't know if I have a specific one in mind. The work of Frank McCarthy, Dirty Dozen, early Bond posters, War Eagles Dare, love it. Yeah, it's like if I could pick one style, it would almost be like, I wish more movie posters now would look like the work of Frank McCarthy.
Yes.
I was actually walking around, God, I hope I'm not confusing it with another one, but I was walking around Target with my friend and fellow designer, Sister Hyde, and we were looking at all of the different Suicide Squad releases, and it's like, you've got the Blu-ray, you have the DVD, you have the 4K, you have the Steelbook, but like none of them use the best artwork.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. You speak of Bob Peak, and you love his Star Wars Wrath of Khan, right? That's the one. Was it Wrath of Khan?
Star Trek: The Motion Picture.
Yeah. That
do
one.
The Wrath of Khan poster too, though.
Yeah. But you say that, and I definitely see. You probably referenced it with your Dune poster you did.
Yeah, that's because I had no idea what to do for Dune, and when in doubt, just steal.
Just steal Bob Peak. Yeah.
But you know what I mean. But,
yeah.
What was it? Dan O'Bannon, who wrote Alien, which that story. It's an amalgam of a lot of different influences, like Star Wars. And someone asked him
Right.
in an interview, did you steal from anybody? And he said, no, I stole from everybody.
Yeah.
And I've always loved that quote.
Yeah.
Not that I do that for every
Definitely.
poster, but sometimes
Right.
it's like, if I have no clue, then okay. And that was just a personal thing anyway. I would never do anything like that for a client.
Thanks for listening to your local Thanks for listening to your local. There I go again. Thanks for listening to your local Cineplex.